chat. I have Taylor joining me today from InFocus Counseling. Welcome, Taylor. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. We both have our cups. I'm so excited. This is actually a really awesome topic. We're going to talk about OCD and acceptance and commitment therapy, and also happiness today. Since today is actually International Day of Happiness, I think it's so perfect for us to have this conversation, especially since I'm sure you also get this a lot, Taylor, with your clients, but I hear from new clients of my own all the time when I ask, what are our treatment goals? They say, I want to be happy or I want to be happier. And I think it's so common. Do you get that same statement from new clients or even existing clients?
All the time. I think people tend to kind of make it as like they still have happy moments, but I think OCD and anything else that we're kind of seeing our clients for can really kind of pull away from those happy moments and just add a lot of stress and fear. And so, yeah, totally. It is a probably every other client at least.
And I think it's so natural too, because of course, why wouldn't we all want to be happy, right?
Mhm.
I mean, happiness is the gold standard, right? I mean, I think that we all aim for it and strive for it, but there's this illusion almost to happiness,
Totally.
especially like the community perspective of happiness, right? And then we add OCD on top of it, and like all the lines get blurred at that point,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Um, and so what are some ways that you've worked with clients to through acceptance and commitment
Hmm.
therapy and also like ERP, i-CBT
Hmm.
for OCD clients to start working towards like that happiness?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really, there's so many different ways where you can start. You can start with the act piece of, like, we have to just work towards being okay with that, like, we have intrusive thoughts, we have these things happening. Or we can go like the ERP, ICBT route of we have to change our mindset. We have to tolerate this discomfort. And something that I like to say to my clients, they've really seemed to like agree with is OCD is going to take away anything that makes you happy because it's trying to keep you safe. And so anything that you're avoiding is probably something that actually is more in line with like your morals and your happiness. But because it's for whatever reason become a fear thing, it's gone. And so if we can get the courage to work towards those things, then most likely we're going to actually bring back that happiness after the fear subsides, of course.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think that sometimes the hardest is recognizing the role that OCD can play as a barrier towards like
Hmm.
your happiness. Now, I mean, I think that it's important to say that happiness looks different for everyone,
Yes.
right? I
Yes.
mean, like um when I said earlier about like the gold standard of happiness, right? Or we're all trying to reach for happiness. Of course we are.
Yeah.
But I think that it's important to say that everyone's happiness looks different.
Hmm.
And so your happiness is different from my happiness, is different from my neighbor's happiness, right? And not to think of happiness in that general form, but more
Hmm.
individualized so that you can also work on your OCD that's getting in the way of you obtaining your individualized happiness, right?
Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think like that is kind of where it goes to is like everyone's happiness is different, everyone's OCD is different. So even though like I run a group with OCD for just like generalized acceptance and commitment and self-compassion, like no one is doing the same activity. It may be all within the same realm of things, but because everyone's happiness and OCD is different, they all have to take the the activity or the homework or whatever you want to call it with like a grain of salt.
Yeah. And I think that's the important piece, is knowing how to, which I mean, it's important, but it's also hard to
Mhm.
take that information and be able to apply it in the individualized format, right?
Yeah.
Of like, I mean, you say like take it with a grain of salt, but like it's more of like take that and like mold it to like
Yes.
how it's going to apply to yourself. right?
Yeah.
Because you can't just take it and like force it into like yourself. That's like
Mhm.
taking a round peg and putting it into a square hole.
Yes.
It's not going to work no matter how hard we try to jam it in there.
Yeah.
So like, how is it going to work for you
Mhm.
specifically, right? In your goal
Yeah.
towards happiness. So,
Yeah.
um, I also wonder, because I mentioned that we also wanted to talk about some acceptance and commitment therapy
Mhm.
components. But I'm sure that there's some people watching that have never heard of acceptance and commitment therapy.
Mhm.
What's sort of like the rundown of
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it can kind of be really explained as like in the simplest way possible. We're working to just like be okay with whatever is happening and commit towards a valued life. So, let's say, for example, like you have the value of like relationships and being social. Like it's working on doing whatever it is and accepting whatever needs to be done to fulfill that within yourself.
okay, okay. And how do we connect that to happiness?
Mhm.
Right? I mean, because
Yeah.
it's gotta be a stepping stone. I
Mhm.
mean, you and I both work in the field. We know that ERP and OCD treatment, is not just a straight path.
Yeah.
So, like, where does acceptance and commitment therapy help us
Mhm.
obtain, "I wanna be happy. I wanna be happier."
And I think that's the hard part. I feel like it's kind of different for everyone, kind of like you're saying, of like it needs to be molded to each person. Like for some people, it's going to be, getting to a point of accepting like we can't control everything. And like some people say, oh, control is what makes me happy. And it's like, maybe, but let's dive a little deeper into that. Like, what about control makes you happy? Because yeah, theoretically, like I can control what coffee I'm drinking today, what my car is doing, like certain things. But at the end of the day, like I'm also like, I'm not a mechanic. I can't really control what my car is. I didn't roast my own coffee beans. I didn't make my own oat milk. Like there's only so much control that I really have, but I have control in my choice and allowing for some of that to kind of fall into line with the treatment of, like I can accept that like I'm going to do the treatment. I can accept when I'm going to push myself. And I can also accept when I'm not ready to push myself on certain things.
So getting to happiness at your own pace.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is super helpful because as fast as we wanna move towards our goal and we want it to happen as soon as possible, right? I mean, if we could all say, "I wanna do this," and it happens by tomorrow, that would be amazing.
Yes.
But we also know, like, that's not how it works, right?
Mhm.
And so it's a step process, and I think that helps us in sort of continuing to define what happiness
Mhm.
looks like for us as well as we're working towards it. Because I know
Yeah.
in my intakes, when I hear, what do we want our treatment goals to be? And the client says, I want to be happy. My next
Mhm.
question out of my mouth is typically, well, what does happiness look like to you?
Yeah.
And they'll give me some sort of definition. They'll paint a picture for me,
Mhm.
and I think it's an amazing piece that we talk about and we continue working towards. But I think it's also amazing to see as we're working towards it how the picture changes
Mhm.
because of their ability to accept, acknowledge, reflect
Yeah.
as we go through the therapeutic journey. Um, and so I think that just like aids not aids, that reinforces that this
Mhm.
is a step process,
Yeah.
as we reach for it. Um, you gave an example of, your coffee or your
Mhm.
car, but I want to go back to your statement about, well, control makes me happy,
Mhm.
right? And we dive deeper there to explore, like, it's not just the control
Yeah.
component's on the surface. We want to go deeper. What are we looking for as we try to dig a little deeper?
I mean, I think again, like it depends for the person. That can be, possibly doing like some work that they didn't have like control or like felt control in like another situation, and how that has kind of shaped them into this area, or looking for like, well, what does that control provide you? Like, is it safety? Is it security? Is it peace? Whatever kind of value that is. And from there kind of saying, okay, well, this sounds more like the core value that we're looking to attain, not necessarily just control.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I always like to kind of dive into like the body sensation, right?
Hmm.
Because I feel like our emotions naturally have a huge component of like body sensation to them, right? When I feel sad, I can feel it in my chest. It gets tight. When I'm, happy or joyful or even content, I have this
Hmm.
like peace kind of wash over me, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's also important to kind of acknowledge, like, when you're diving deeper, um, in some of these areas where it's not just control, right? It's also thinking about, like, well, how do I know this is happiness to me?
Hmm.
And it could be, like for me, like I said, like that washover, um, peace feeling. It could be a fuzzy, warm feeling. It could
Hmm.
be sort of like that jolt of like almost like electricity because you're so excited. All of those could also be what you're experiencing when you're
Yeah.
feeling the happiness of like a control element, right?
Hmm.
Because you're right, like as we're standing in the grocery store picking out what milk we want for our coffee, there's a reason why we lean towards oat milk instead of a
Yeah.
different kind, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, what's that feeling? Because that's a
Hmm.
piece of like your happiness, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Um, so I mean, I want to take us back to how this all can apply and be beneficial towards OCD treatment because
Hmm.
I know that we both specialize in obsessive compulsive disorder, but there's a lot that gets in the way there for our clients that interfere with them obtaining happiness, especially while we're doing ERP, which causes anxiety,
Yep.
right? Um, and I think that's why I always describe that I like to do ERP and ACT,
Hmm.
and other modalities and techniques as well to help like kind of balance a little bit so that
Hmm.
it's not just anxiety, 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 anxiety. Like it's yeah, we're doing things that cause anxiety, but we're also trying to work towards, like you said, that value based living, right?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I think, like, in a sense, the way that even ERP works, I think it, even though it doesn't necessarily straightforward say like, oh, here's acted this part, here's an act in this part. I think a lot of it already is kind of together. And so they fit so easily together into saying, like, if you're going to be working on reframing like some of their obsessional thoughts, or doing some of these things, like, you're really working on saying, okay, like, it's going to happen either way, and I'm going to accept that, but I'm going to change my response here. Because that's what, like, you can control in the moment is the response. It's not that it's going to happen or not. I can't control, as much as I would like to. When my dog, like, chooses to run around and lose her mind, as much as I want to, but I can control how I react to it. I can either play along with it, or I can just like be like, ignore it and let it go.
I think, I mean, we're getting back to control elements, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a good point to make, especially with OCD treatment, because um, when we have a distressing thought,
Mhm.
we have that feeling, right? Oh, heart palpitations, sweaty palms, racing
Mhm.
thoughts, all of those things, and then we have the compulsion to try and make us feel better, right? And
Mhm.
I do air quotes because we know
Yeah.
that compulsion are temporary relief versus long-term relief. Um, and we have these like immediate reactions because I don't like this feeling. I want to feel something
Yep.
different. And so I need to do something right now about it. And even pausing during ERP to do something different
Mhm.
that I know this is hard, but I want to do this so that I can have this result instead,
Yeah.
it is a difficult choice to make because it's scary.
Mhm.
But
Yes.
we also accept that it's difficult right now, but it's helping me down the road
Mhm.
versus with a compulsion. I accept that it gives me relief right now, but it could be snowballing for me later, right?
Entirely. Yeah. Like, the way I really appreciate, like, the way you say that it's hard right now, because that is the big thing is, like, it's not going to be hard forever. That's the whole purpose in this is the regulation of your body and working on making that come easier to yourself, and so, yeah, it's gonna be really hard to regulate yourself when you first start out, but even 2, 3, 4 times down the line of doing that exposure, it's already easier and easier and easier.
And as we're working down that difficult path, because that's what
Mhm.
I don't want to say that ERP is the difficult path because
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds so scary, and I don't wanna turn anyone away from ERP, treatment because it's extremely beneficial for obsessive compulsive disorder,
Mhm.
but it is hard. It is
Yep.
hard, but it's leading us towards the happiness, it's leading us
Mhm.
towards the value-based living,
Yeah.
um, and all of the goals in life that a client, wants, desires, and deserves 100%
Yes.
because OCD, gets in the way of all of that and adds to the snowball effect and also lies to us and says that we need the snowball, right? And we come to find out through treatment that we don't. We don't need the snowball,
Mhm.
and I'd rather live this way so that I can have the things that I desire, that I deserve to have, right?
Yeah.
So, um, I think it's important to say that because I don't wanna turn like I said, I don't wanna turn anybody away from ERP treatment,
No, no, no.
but, I think it's helpful to say that, and even though I say that it's a difficult process,
Mhm.
you have a professional to work alongside
Yes.
you through that process, which helps make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think too, like, just an even a simple thing to remind ourselves too of, like, nothing easy is rewarding. Everything that's been rewarding for us has been difficult in one way or another.
True. Most definitely. I mean, and, I mean, I say to my clients, same concept, but just different wording, that
Yeah.
growth is uncomfortable,
Mhm.
right? Our safety box that we put ourselves in, if we want change, we have to start towing ourselves out of that box, and
Yeah.
that's uncomfortable. And so growth is uncomfortable. Same concept, different wording,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
we're telling our clients the same thing, it sounds like. So,
Yes.
um well, I want to talk a little bit more about. We've mentioned a couple of times, you and I both, about
Mhm.
value based living. What exactly is that?
I mean, it's I don't wanna say it's hard to describe, but it kind of is in a sense. Like, it's doing things in your day-to-day life, maybe not even day to day, but trying to, that give you meaning. I know, like, let's like my one of my values is like healthy and getting outside. Like it's Colorado. I can get outside sometimes. I'm not going to be able to get outside all the time. And I have to accept that, but the majority of the time when I can do that, I'm doing that for myself. It's kind of like that where it doesn't need to be a strict hard and set rule or like requirement that you do something every single day, but it's working on fulfilling those values as often as we can.
Because they lead towards our individualized happiness.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think you bring up a good point. I'm glad you mentioned it, that it's not something that we can act on every single day.
Yeah.
Because I think it'd be real easy for us to think, oh, I want to live a valued based living. It's going to be a step towards like my happiness. But oh man, the weather outside's really terrible today. And I can't go for my hike or my walk
Mhm.
or whatever. Um, am I still living a valued based life today, even though the weather says no? Right.
Yeah.
And does that get in the way of our happiness? Or how do we make sure it doesn't get in the way of our happiness?
I think that's the thing that humans are complex. We don't have just one value that we live towards. It's many different things that we feel that fulfill our lives, fulfill our cups, you know? And maybe for that one day, that one can't be available. But, you know, another value of mine is like connection. Maybe I can FaceTime a friend and just talk to them for a while and still obtain that. Or even just getting connection like by snuggling with my dog. Like having something else to say, you know, this still makes me feel good in the same way, even if it's not pertaining to that specific value.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, because we're not saying, I don't know how to phrase it so it comes off like smoothly, but I'm gonna just wing it here. We're not saying like only outdoor value-based
Mhm.
living. It's
Yes.
more of the generic umbrella of like value-based living, and you're right, we all have
Mhm.
multiple different values. Um, and sometimes we forget that we have multiple
Yeah.
because one has pushed its way to the forefront, and we're really focused on that one.
Mhm.
But we all have a bunch of different values
Yeah.
that we can act on, and continuously be interchanging, be working them together to be working towards like our individualized happiness.
Mhm. Exactly.
Well, I know that we're almost out of time, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time, Taylor, to chat with me on the topic of happiness with OCD and acceptance and commitment therapy. And I wonder, is there like
Mhm.
sort of a takeaway or take home message about happiness that you would love to share with our
Yeah. I mean, I think reminding ourselves like happiness is attainable, but also kind of like the values. It may not happen every day, and that's okay. We have our ups and downs, and that's also part of ACT is accepting some days are going to be down.
audience? I think that's definitely a hard grasp that
It is.
happiness isn't something that we will reach and then forever
Mhm.
check off and be like, I did it. I'm gonna be happy forever now. And that just like life, there's gonna be ups and downs and ebbs and flows, and it's still okay.
Yeah.
Um, because we have ways to work towards our happiness.
Mhm.
So I love that. Thank you for that message.
Thank you. Yeah.
Um, well, thank you so much again. I know you'll be back with me for future talks. But I truly appreciate you celebrating International Day of Happiness with me. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was great. And yes, definitely we'll be back.